Hello everyone. As we continue with Civics Chapter 3, we've already had a look at how apartheid or racial discrimination was being practiced in South Africa there was an umbrella organization called the ANC, or the African National Congress, which fought against it. As we continue, we're now going to have a look at how finally South Africa actually got freedom, and then how beautifully they wrote their constitution. A very famous leader who rose to power because of his fight against apartheid was Nelson Mandela. Well, the apartheid government, or this this racially dominant government, came to an end on the midnight of 26th April 1994, and it paved the way for the formation of a multiracial government, which means people in this new government belonged to all kinds of races, were of all colors, and there was no discrimination. Nelson Mandela was definitely released, but before that, he actually spent 28 years on the Robben Island prison. Once the new constitution was made, this discriminatory laws were repealed, which means discriminatory laws were removed, and ban on political parties and restrictions on the media were lifted. This is important because there has to be an opposition, and there have to be bodies which always raise their voices, because otherwise the government can keep doing what they feel like and you would never know. And free press or free media, freedom of press or freedom of media is also important, so that people actually are aware of what is happening. And when people are aware of what is happening, the government is all the more accountable to them, which then leads to the fact that the government would work properly. I'm going to read the excerpt from the speech of Nelson Mandela. He was the first president of the newly born Republic of South Africa. And this is how the speech goes. Historical enemies succeeded in negotiating a peaceful transition from apartheid to democracy, exactly because we were prepared to accept the inherent capacity for goodness in the other. My wish is that South Africans never give up on the belief in goodness, that they cherish that faith in human beings is the cornerstone of our democracy. This speech very beautifully portrays the fact that although the South Africans, majority of the population of South Africans had been discriminated against, they had been badly treated, but they did not hold this bitterness in their heart, because when the new constitution came to power, and when these blacks come to power, they could have behaved in the same discriminatory, derogatory way that the whites had done with them. But they say no. We have joined hands for the betterment of humanity. We are going to look ahead to a better, brighter future which involves everyone. So that's what Nelson Mandela is talking about. He says that we need to remember how, and in the end, it's humanity which will always win, and we should never let this goodness in ourselves go away. The new South African government was based on equality of all races and men and women, on democratic values, social justice, and human rights. Those are the cornerstones of the Constitution of South Africa. Why was this need? Why was there a need for this type of a constitution? Very interestingly, we see that once the blacks come to power, they want to make sure that they are not ill-treated again. However, at this time, the whites also want to be sure that they are not oppressed or discriminated against, and so a balance is struck in the new constitution. The oppressor and oppressed plan to live together as equals in this new democracy. Each section wanted to safeguard their interests and wanted substantial social and economic rights. The whites agreed to the principle of majority rule and that of one person, one vote. We've already had a look at this concept of one person, one vote in the earlier chapter. They also agreed to accept some basic rights for the poor and the workers. the blacks agreed that majority rule would not be absolute and that the majority would not take away the property of the white minority. These points are very important because they're saying that people who've been enemies for a very long time have suddenly agreed to live together peacefully, respect each other. People across genders and colors and races are going to now live peacefully with political rights. The fact that there was now one person, one vote meant that, which would also indefinitely mean that each person's vote had one value, which would then mean everyone is politically based on an equal footing. And the last part said that they tried to make sure that there was rule of majority, but this majority did not harm the minority community. That's important because we follow something like that in India also. In India, we've got various communities, but it's understood that Hindus are in majority. But what about the Muslims, the Christians, the Parsis, the Sikhs, the Jains, the Buddhists? So there are a lot of minority communities in the country, but our constitution, the Constitution of India, makes sure that none of these minorities are threatened, that none of their rights are taken away, that they feel as comfortable as the majority does in India. The similar thing was also done in South Africa, so that no community would feel threatened, would feel insecure just because they were less in number, and no community could dominate and behave as they wanted just because they were more in number or in majority. Now, purpose of a constitution. Every country has diverse groups of people. All over the world, people have differences of opinion and interests. The constitution is the supreme law that determines the relationship among people living in a territory, and people living in this territory are called citizens, and also the relationship between the people and the government. So basically, this is how you're going to categorize how or why we need a constitution. First, it generates a degree of trust and coordination that is necessary for different kind of people to live together. Second, it specifies how the government will be constituted and who will have the power to take which decision. Third, it lays down limits on the powers of the government and tells us what the rights of the citizens are. And fourth, it expresses the aspirations of the people about creating a good society. All countries that have constitutions are not necessarily democratic, but all countries that are democratic will have constitutions. Constitutions may be written, constitutions may be unwritten, there may be laws coming down through culture, but there are going to be these laws which will tell us how the government will be constituted, how the government is going to behave with the citizens. The government cannot misuse its power, the citizens have their rights which they will safeguard. At the same time, how citizens are going to behave with each other, and so on and so forth. And of course, it also lays down the aspirations of the citizens as well as the duties of the citizens. You must have had a look in Form 8 about fundamental rights. We'll again see them in detail later in your syllabus. And they both go hand in hand, fundamental rights as well as fundamental duties, which we need to do as citizens. Alright, we're going to stop there, and in the next video we're going to have a look at the making of the Indian Constitution. With this we come to an end quickly about the South African Constitution. So we saw what was happening in South Africa, how people fought against it, and eventually what their constitution came to constitute, and why in general we need a constitution. If you remember one incident, a famous incident that happened, well, kind of infamous incident because it wasn't nothing very nice about it. It happened with Mahatma Gandhi when he was a barrister in South Africa, when he was practicing law. He boarded a train, so he had the money and he bought a first class ticket and he boarded the train. However, he was asked to leave the compartment, the first class compartment, and he was thrown out of the train because he was colored. And colored people at that time in South Africa, when apartheid was being practiced, colored people were not allowed to travel in first class compartments. I've given examples how there were separate beaches, separate picnic areas, separate cinema halls, theaters, so on and so forth. Same way, even for trains. And Mahatma Gandhi had to face the problem as well, even though he had the ticket of a first class. So, well, yeah, that's apartheid for you. All right then, thank you.